information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the Gold Money Podcast with Alistair MacLeod, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Hello, this is Alistair MacLeod on behalf of Gold Money. And with me on the line from Auburn in Texas is Philipp Bagus, who's Assistant Professor of Economics at the University of Rey Juan Carlos in Madrid. And Philipp wrote an important book, The Tragedy of the Euro, which was published in 2010 and is now in its second edition and has also been translated into 7 languages. I read the book when I interviewed Philipp last November, and I still find it relevant to today's events, and I thoroughly recommend it. Philipp has also co-authored another book, Deep Freeze, Iceland's Economic Collapse. Welcome, Philipp. Is it just a coincidence that you're in the same town as the Ludwig von Mises Institute?
No, of course not. I'm teaching some classes at the Mises University this year.
Oh, right. Well, the more people who understand Austrian economics, the better. So I think you're doing good work there. When we last met, I remember you mentioned the political difficulty for Eurozone countries in dealing with their deficits. And we certainly see that in Greece, where since then the government has failed completely. Spain seems to have tried hard and has still failed. And now you're very familiar with the situation in Spain. And I wondered, can you give us a brief overview of how you see the situation there and how it's likely to develop?
Yeah, indeed, the Spanish government has had difficulties or didn't want to do what is necessary. Instead of radically cutting government expenditures, government spending, they cut it a little bit, very cautiously, and focused more on increasing taxes, which of course is very, very harmful for the economy that is already in a recession. And when you then, if someone is half dead and then you increase taxes, probably you will have even less tax revenue. And of course, they are facing already resistance from the street. They are losing support in the population. So, and they are saying they have done everything that is necessary. At the same time, they are begging every day that the ECB comes and buys Spanish government debts. So I can understand that private investors do not want to lend them any more money.
Well, that's interesting. So even though they have tried to deal with the situation, what you're saying is that they have gone about it the wrong way. What they should have done is they should have cut the inefficient use of economic resources through too much government and not increase the taxes. And they've just gone totally the wrong way round. But isn't this true of virtually every other government in the Eurozone? Where they've got these difficulties, they seem unable to bring about the cuts in public spending, and instead they're just chasing anyone with any money out of the country, or chasing them to hide it, as far as I can see. Italy is the same. Have I got this right?
Yeah, that is totally correct. I guess it's easier. I mean, they don't really want to reduce the size of the government. They are interested in a big government sector, so what they want to do have to higher tax revenues. And in Spain especially, they increased the income tax, they increased the value-added tax several times, special taxes on tobacco were increased. So it's normal that people don't want to invest or risk money in private businesses at this point.
I suppose that politicians are being advised mainly by neoclassical economists, particularly Keynesians and monetarists, who believe that a centrally planned approach can achieve a positive economic result. Is that a big factor in their thinking? I mean, is it because they've got nowhere else to turn to in terms of advice?
I think that I think they know what had to be done from an economic perspective, but they don't want to do it for political reasons, because they don't want to lose elections. There are many people on the public payroll in Spain, and many people receive government goodies
yes.
In Spain. So they probably know what should be done, but they don't want to lose elections nor support in the population. And this is amazing, considering that, for example, Mariano Rajoy in Spain, the president, has an absolute majority in the parliament and also in the comunidades, but he just don't want to lose support in the population.
So he has turned out to be a very weak leader who won't even pursue his public mandate.
Right. He has turned into Zapatero too. He's just following Zapatero's policies as a social democrat.
Oh dear. Another country, France. Now, when you and I last met, we had Sarkozy, who was at least trying to work with Chancellor Merkel to get some sort of positive result. But now President Hollande, this is a great change. And I would guess the implications for France and the whole Eurozone must be far-reaching. Would I view Hollande as not only rebelling against authority, but also abandoning Germany, Holland and Finland in their fight to impose fiscal discipline? Would this be right?
This is totally right. At least Sarkozy went in the right direction with some of his measures, only very slowly, much too slow. That made me say in my book which I still believe that France may be the last nail in the coffin of the euro. So I still believe that, and now Hollande goes even in the wrong direction. He raises retirement age again. He raises minimum wages. He wants to make releasing people, hiring people more costly. And then this, of course, gives a good excuse for other countries like Greece, Spain, Italy to not do the necessary reforms either. So you're perfectly right. He slows down and maybe even reverts the reform process that would be necessary to maintain a more or less stable euro.
Well, I think this is very important because the Euro project has really been the political glue, if you like, for Germany and France in particular in the context of the European Union and the gradual move towards political integration. I mean, this has presumably got profound implications for the euro itself, I would think.
Yeah, you make a very good point. The traditional alliance between France and Germany is about to break up, and of course Merkel has to have for the German population. Merkel has to be ever more strongly harsher on the peripheral countries. Also, elections are coming on next year. So while Sarkozy goes in one direction, this puts Merkel even more in the direction on austerity and making no compromises, which eventually may lead to some countries breaking up from the Eurozone.
Yes, and you mentioned the elections in Germany are next year, I think you said. Presumably the German electorate are looking at this and getting very, very worried about it. This must be driving them, I would think, away from socialism, if you like, in the opposite direction from France, putting the economic considerations aside for a moment. I just sort of sense there's a political division just building and building the whole time. Is that how you would see it, Philip?
Yes, but of course people see it see what is going down, the ESM and everything. or the guarantees that they are subscribing, they don't like it. Obviously, they wouldn't sign it, but they are not being asked. This is how democracy works these days. Yes. And but there's no strong resistance still, because like on a Friday, the ESM has been voted in Parliament, but then the father of the family goes home, the dog is still barking, the children are still playing. It has not really affected them. But this can change, of course, when in Germany also there's a recession. And in Germany there's a recession and unemployment goes up. Then I think the resistance to support of peripheral countries and of all the bailout mechanisms in Germany will rise sharply, and then actually the political pressure to actually leave the euro for Germany will increase.
That's interesting. I think, if I've got this takeaway right, the political consequences are likely to start hitting the whole problem as unemployment in Germany rises, as the economy gets dragged down by the problems of the rest of the Eurozone. I think that's a very, very interesting point you make. Slightly different emphasis. You mentioned the ESM, and that might have been very recently approved in the Bundestag, but there are various other countries haven't even approved it yet, as far as I can see, and I don't think that's going to be in existence until early next year. And then when I look at the EFSF, which is the one that seems to have been set up, I asked the question, who's going to pay for it? Because about 40% on my calculations of the backing for the ESF comes from countries who have had a bailout or are seeking a bailout, or even looking forward a little bit will need one. And that's not even including France. I mean, that throws the burden of this back particularly on Germany, Holland, Luxembourg and Finland, as far as I can see. Now, they're not going to take the whole of the cost of bailing out all the other countries. If France stands back, which I would have thought is a consequence of the political division, I mean, how is this going to be resolved? Is there a way? Is there a sort of plan B, or are we right to be worried about this structure?
Well, you make a very good point that some people that are guaranteeing all this bailout mechanism, they are actually not able to guarantee it. So when they have already received aid, so they are not supposed to guarantee or to pay in their share, the capital share of the ESM, for example. So as ever more countries break away, the burden on Germany, Finland, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and maybe Austria, it gets ever higher. A few weeks ago, I calculated all the risks for Germany involved through the guarantees made from the government bonds bought by the ECB, the bilateral loans to Greece. So all in all, if Germany at the end has to pay all of it, it's 2.2 trillion euros, which is obvious. It's more than double of the public German debt. So this does not even take into account that interest rates in Germany will rise, and so you can see to pay 2.2 trillion. This is like 4 times the annual tax revenues in Germany. So this is just unsustainable. Germany cannot burden the weight to bail out the rest of Europe. So I don't see any way that this can be maintained through bailing on the shoulders of Germany. As for the plan B, there remains then only the ECB monetizing like crazy government debt. That's the only other plan B that is possible.
Yes, I was interested in what you were saying about 4 times tax revenue. Presumably that includes Germany's share of the Target 2 imbalances, which presumably are never going to get refunded to her.
Right. The 2.2 trillion includes also the Target 2. Yes.
Yeah. That's a horrifying figure, and presumably at some stage people in Germany are going to become sufficiently alarmed about this. 4 times tax revenues in Germany, at some stage, presumably people are going to wake up to this, and this is going to call time on this process, really, of Chancellor Merkel just stonewalling, because the options will be closing very, very rapidly. And I mean, are we anywhere near that point? I suppose part of it is you've already answered it, because if unemployment starts rising and then you got the elections last year, I mean, from what you're saying, Germany really is running out of time.
Yeah, I don't think it's so close yet, because the economy is still growing in Germany. But if there's a worldwide recession, for example, if China gets into a recession and the US, and then German exports suffer to Asia and the Eurozone, it's not so important, the peripheral countries for German exports. But of course, if all this drags down Germany, and then, of course, you have to take into account that then maybe inflation also starts to rise if the ECB starts to accommodate all this government spending via monetization. And Germans are very adverse to inflation. So if there are double-digit inflation rates on top, then then it gets very difficult to hold Germany within the Eurozone. And you see already the pressure building up, in the sense that it looks like as if Merkel is opposing bond purchases from the ECB and is very harsh on Greece also. So there's no other renegotiation of the Greek bailout. So it looks as if this is already starts to affecting the political positions.
Yeah. Right. Well, this is not good news. The effect on the euro, I would have thought, is going to be very important, because we have seen the euro has now come down to just below 121 this morning against the dollar. We could, I suppose, if we go below that 120 level, that would be a psychological break point. And one thing that interests me in this is that if you have a loss of confidence in a fiat currency, there's no knowing quite where the slide is likely to take it. Would you share that view, or have you got a different take on it?
Yeah, you are precisely right that lastly, these fiat currencies rest on confidence. And when the confidence goes, the value of the fiat currency can go to its material value, that is basically zero. Of course, governments can do some things to oppose this by restoring confidence. For example, the central banks can support the fiat currencies by buying them, selling the assets to buy the fiat currency, but the ECB has no good assets left, almost no good assets left to do that. And governments could also then recapitalize the central bank. For example, governments could tax their citizens and send gold to the ECB, so the ECB has more gold reserves. This could restore confidence. But all these measures are increasingly less possible, because governments are ever more bankrupt and the ECB becomes ever more a bad bank. So we might at some point reach this point where confidence is irreversibly lost.
Yes, and I've just one final point on this. It seems to me that the euro is actually quite different as a fiat currency compared with other fiat currency, and I'm taking a slight leaf out of your tragedy of the commons analogy in your book. It seems to me that the US dollar and sterling, for example, has the backing of an individual government and the theoretical tax revenue from that government to back up their promise, if you like. But the more I look at the euro and the more you look at, or you see countries not pulling together but protecting their own interests and sort of trying maybe to find an escape route from the whole thing. The euro, it seems to me, is a currency with no one government prepared to stand up and promise any value for it. Is this a serious issue, or will it be, do you think?
Yeah, this is indeed a very serious issue, because when the ECB has losses, and it probably will have losses, it has to be recapitalized to maintain exactly this confidence we have been talking about. And then there may be, some countries may not be able to contribute according to their capital share. So then others may not be have the whole burden. And markets know that, of course. So it may get difficult. However, in December 2010, the ECB actually increased their capital already. I guess expecting losses on their policies, on their assets.
Yes, but I think we still have the problem, at the end of the day, which government is going to stand behind the euro? And, increasingly as things develop, it's hard to see which government is going to stand behind it. I think that's, to me, is the worry. Anyway, Philipp, thank you very much indeed for taking time out to do this podcast. I think that the timing of this, I think, is very, very important, and your views, I think, will be listened to by our listeners with great interest. So on their behalf, thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome, Alistair.
Subscribe to the Gold Money newsletter at www.goldmoney.com to receive email updates on new articles, videos, and iTunes podcasts from our Gold Research section.
Work there. When we last met, I remember you mentioned the political difficulty for Eurozone countries in dealing with their deficits. And we certainly see that in Greece, where since then the government has failed completely. Spain seems to have tried hard and has still failed. And now you're very familiar with the situation in Spain. And I wondered, can you give us a brief overview of how you see the situation there and how it's likely to develop?
Yeah, indeed, the Spanish government has had difficulties, or didn't want to do what is necessary. Instead of radically cutting government...
Euro, which was published in 2010 and is now in its second edition and has also been translated into 7 languages. I read the book when I interviewed Philipp last November, and I still find it relevant to today's events, and I thoroughly recommend it. Philipp has also co-authored another book, Deep Freeze, Iceland's Economic Collapse. Welcome, Philipp. Is it just a coincidence that you're in the same town as the Ludwig von Mises Institute?
No, of course not. I'm teaching some classes at the Mises University this year.
Oh, right. Well, the more people who understand Austrian economics, the better. So I think you're doing good work.
Expenditures, government spending. They cut it a little bit, very cautiously, and focused more on increasing taxes, which of course is very, very harmful for the economy that is already in a recession. And when you then, if someone is half dead and then you increase taxes, probably you will have even less tax revenue. And of course, they are facing already resistance from the street. They are losing support in the population. So, and they are saying they have done everything that is necessary. At the same time, they are begging every day that this.
The information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the Gold Money Podcast with Alistair MacLeod, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Hello, this is Alistair MacLeod on behalf of Gold Money. And with me on the line from Auburn in Texas is Philipp Bagus, who's Assistant Professor of Economics at the University of Rey Juan Carlos in Madrid. And Philip wrote an important book, The Tragedy of the...
ECB comes and buys Spanish government debts, so I can understand that private investors do not want to lend them any more money.
Well, that's interesting. So even though they have tried to deal with the situation, what you're saying is that they have gone about it the wrong way. What they should have done is they should have cut the inefficient use of economic resources through too much government and not increase the taxes. And they've just gone totally the wrong way round. But isn't this true of virtually every other government in the Eurozone? Where they've got these difficulties, they seem unable